This is a CBS News special report. Attack on Libya. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
Good evening. Following word tonight that U.S. airstrikes have been carried out against what U.S. officials call Muammar Gaddafi's terrorist centers in Libya, President Reagan is about to address the American people from the Oval Office. Just a short while ago, Libyan radio claimed that among the targets hit was Libyan leader Gaddafi's house, and according to Libyan radio, the only source available on this, some of Gaddafi's relatives may have been wounded. President Reagan now is expected to speak from the Oval Office.
My fellow Americans, at 7 o'clock this evening, Eastern Time, air and naval forces of the United States launched a series of strikes against the headquarters, terrorist facilities, and military assets that support Muammar Gaddafi's subversive activities. The attacks were concentrated and carefully targeted to minimize casualties among the Libyan people, with whom we have no quarrel. From initial reports, our forces have succeeded in their mission. Several weeks ago in New Orleans, I warned Colonel Gaddafi we would hold his regime accountable for any new terrorist attacks launched against American citizens. More recently, I made it clear we would respond as soon as we determined conclusively who was responsible for such attacks. On April 5th, in West Berlin, a terrorist bomb exploded in a nightclub frequented by American servicemen. Sergeant Kenneth Ford and a young Turkish woman were killed, and 230 others were wounded, among them some 50 American military personnel. This monstrous brutality is but the latest act in Colonel Gaddafi's reign of terror. The evidence is now conclusive that the terrorist bombing of La Belle discotheque was planned and executed under the direct orders of the Libyan regime. On March 25th, more than a week before the attack, orders were sent from Tripoli to the Libyan People's Bureau in East Berlin to conduct a terrorist attack against Americans to cause maximum and indiscriminate casualties. Libya's agents then planted the bomb. On April 4th, the People's Bureau alerted Tripoli that the attack would be carried out the following morning. The next day, they reported back to Tripoli on the great success of their mission. Our evidence is direct, it is precise, it is irrefutable. We have solid evidence about other attacks Gaddafi has planned against the United States installations and diplomats and even American tourists. Thanks to close cooperation with our friends, some of these have been prevented. With the help of French authorities, we recently aborted one such attack, a planned massacre using grenades and small arms of civilians waiting in line for visas at an American embassy. Colonel Gaddafi is not only an enemy of the United States. His record of subversion and aggression against the neighboring states in Africa is well documented and well known. He has ordered the murder of fellow Libyans in countless countries. He has sanctioned acts of terror in Africa, Europe, and the Middle East, as well as the Western Hemisphere. Today, we have done what we had to do. If necessary, we shall do it again. It gives me no pleasure to say that, and I wish it were otherwise. Before Gaddafi seized power in 1969, the people of Libya had been friends of the United States. And I'm sure that today most Libyans are ashamed and disgusted that this man has made their country a synonym for barbarism around the world. The Libyan people are a decent people, caught in the grip of a tyrant. To our friends and allies in Europe who cooperated in today's mission, I would only say, you have the permanent gratitude of the American people. Europeans who remember history understand better than most that there is no security, no safety in the appeasement of evil. It must be the core of Western policy that there be no sanctuary for terror. And to sustain such a policy, free men and free nations must unite and work together. Sometimes it is said that by imposing sanctions against Colonel Gaddafi or by striking at his terrorist installations, we only magnify the man's importance, that the proper way to deal with him is to ignore him. I do not agree. Long before I came into this office, Colonel Gaddafi had engaged in acts of international terror, acts that put him outside the company of civilized men. For years, however, he suffered no economic or political or military sanction, and the atrocities mounted in number, as did the innocent dead and wounded. And for us to ignore, by inaction, the slaughter of American civilians and American soldiers, whether in nightclubs or airline terminals, is simply not in the American tradition. When our citizens are abused or attacked anywhere in the world on the direct orders of a hostile regime, we will respond so long as I'm in this Oval Office. Self-defense is not only our right, it is our duty. It is the purpose behind the mission undertaken tonight, a mission fully consistent with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. We believe that this preemptive action against his terrorist installations will not only diminish Colonel Gaddafi's capacity to export terror, it will provide him with incentives and reasons to alter his criminal behavior. I have no illusion that tonight's action will ring down the curtain on Gaddafi's reign of terror. But this mission, violent though it was, can bring closer a safer and more secure world for decent men and women. We will persevere. This afternoon, we consulted with the leaders of Congress regarding what we were about to do and why. Tonight, I salute the skill and professionalism of the men and women of our armed forces who carried out this mission. It's an honor to be your commander-in-chief. We Americans are slow to anger. We always seek peaceful avenues before resorting to the use of force. And we did. We tried quiet diplomacy, public condemnation, economic sanctions, and demonstrations of military force. None succeeded. Despite our repeated warnings, Gaddafi continued his reckless policy of intimidation, his relentless pursuit of terror. He counted on America to be passive. He counted wrong. I warned that there should be no place on earth where terrorists can rest and train and practice their deadly skills. I meant it. I said that we would act with others if possible and alone if necessary to ensure that terrorists have no sanctuary anywhere. Tonight, we have. Thank you, and God bless you.
Live and direct from the Oval Office, the main office of the President of the United States, President Ronald Reagan, explaining to the American people and reporting to the American people on tonight's strikes against the Libyan government of Muammar Gaddafi. Now, recapping briefly, the President outlined the reasons why he ordered tonight's U.S. military strikes against Libya, what he called, and I quote him now, direct, precise, and irrefutable evidence, unquote, of Libya's hand in terror attacks. The President made a point of mentioning attacks already carried out and attacks being planned. That, of course, according to U.S. intelligence. President Reagan said that first indications were that the U.S. strikes on Libya were successful. The President gave very little hard information on what targets were hit. He had nothing to say about the possibility of any U.S. casualties. He did say everything had been done to try to minimize casualties to Libyans not involved in terrorism. Now, earlier this evening, we have had information from the Pentagon sources and also from sources on Capitol Hill that among the targets were 5 in Libya, 3 in and around Tripoli, 2 in and around Benghazi, which is on the other side of the Gulf of Sidra from Tripoli. Barracks in Tripoli and Benghazi, that's where the command, control, and training facilities for terrorism was believed to be at those barracks. A port facility at Sidi Bilal, that's a port facility. This was one of the targets. Keep in mind, as we list off these targets, we do not know if any of these targets were hit, much less destroyed. We do not know that. These were among the targets listed. Now, the port facility at Sidi Bilal is believed to be a place where the Libyans move people and equipment overseas, believed for terrorist activities, perhaps oil pumping facilities there as well. The military side of the Tripoli airport was one of the targets. The Benina military airfield, where at least at one time Soviet-manufactured MiG-25s had been based. Whether there were any MiG-25s there during this strike, if indeed the target was hit, we simply do not know. Now, it is not, and I repeat again for emphasis, not clear whether any or all of these were actually hit or destroyed. F-111 American fighter bombers taking off from Britain were involved in the raid, as were carrier-based planes. Now, we're going to go first to Alan Pizzi, who is in Tripoli. Alan, if you're there have been no strikes over the last hour to hour and a half, as I understand it.
You're quoting the guy. I'm for revenge.
Hello, Alan. We're on the air. And the question is, have there been any strikes since roughly 7:25, 7:30 tonight, U.S. Eastern Time?
Dan, since that one and only strike ended, there has been nothing else. The city has been virtually blacked out. The port lights have been turned off. We can see the glow from what we think is a soccer stadium, but apart from that, it's very, very quiet. There's no traffic moving to speak of. There was a lot right after the raid, and now there's just not much going on at all. It's very quiet. There's been no other sign of activity. We are locked into the city's main hotel where the foreign press is housed and can't get out in the street, so we can't tell you any more than we can see out the windows, but right now it's very quiet.
Alan, two questions. I'm going to ask you in a moment exactly what you saw and heard earlier this evening when the airstrikes were underway, but first, Libyan radio is being rather widely quoted now. Libyan radio quoted as saying that one of Muammar Gaddafi's houses was hit, and this is the Libyan radio claim that some of his relatives were at least injured. Any information at all on that from where you are?
All we have is the fact that Libyan radio at 3:25 local time, which was about an hour after the strike ended, broke into their regular programming to say that Gaddafi's compound at Bab al-Azia had been hit. It's a very large compound, 3 acres or more, surrounded by a concrete wall. Inside is Gaddafi's house and his tent, and that's where his family stays, his wife and 7 children. The radio says that several members of his family were injured. They also report that there were a lot of other wounded, and they say among them were mostly foreigners. Inside that compound are a lot of Gaddafi's top advisors' houses, but we don't know if any foreigners are really in there or who they might be, but that is what Libyan radio is saying. The radio also came on just a few minutes ago with a kind of a commentary calling for revenge to be wreaked against the Americans and calling for Arab nations to attack American bases around the Mediterranean. That was a commentary on Libyan radio. We don't know how authoritative it is, but it was a very angry diatribe coming down in Arabic off those radio waves.
Very quickly, Alan, exactly what did you see and hear in the way of explosions and weaponry?
We were woken up at 2 o'clock by the sound of jets thundering across the city at a very low level, and then there were some very loud explosions and a lot of anti-aircraft fire. There were bursts of fire from various points around the city, the sound of loud impacts like bombs hitting, a lot of anti-aircraft tracer going up into the sky. Some people did see some flashes of perhaps impacts, and we didn't actually see the jets. One just heard them. There were several. It's impossible to say how many because they came in very low and very fast in the dark, but they made a lot of runs. The raid went on for about 20 minutes. The anti-aircraft fire going up into the sky continued for some time after the jets were gone, and there were no other sounds of explosions. People here said, in some positions, said they thought they saw explosions near the former Wheelus Air Force Base, which was the large American air base before the Americans were kicked out. But
Alan, pardon me for interrupting, but I do want to pass along, and perhaps you'd be able to help us with this, that the Associated Press reports that the French embassy in Tripoli, Libya, was hit during the U.S. bombing raid earlier this evening. The French Foreign Ministry is quoted by the Associated Press in Paris. This is an AP report out of Paris, quoting the French Foreign Ministry as saying the French embassy in Tripoli was hit. A French Foreign Ministry spokesman went on to say that the embassy was hit, but that no one was injured. The spokesman provided no information on the extent of damage. The French Foreign Minister has been informed of the situation, but the Foreign Ministry himself has had no comment. And also, we're just told, Alan, that Libyan radio is now quoted in London, where they're monitoring Libyan radio. Libyan radio quoted as saying that 3 U.S. planes were shot down. I'm reminded that the last time that there was an engagement, they made claims that later turned out to be untrue, that while President Reagan did not speak about any even possible U.S. casualties tonight, that earlier information from Bill Plant, our White House correspondent, was that all of the U.S. planes were believed to have returned safely to their carrier bases, and in the case of the F-111s used to their bases in Britain. Very quickly, Alan, anything additional on that, and then we want to go to our Pentagon correspondent.
Sorry, Dan, we can't tell you anything else about that. As I say, we've all been locked into the hotel, and no one can actually see what's gone on here. But there was nothing to indicate to us that anything had been shot down. But of course, if it was shot down, it could have well have gone into the sea. There was nothing that we could see hit the city, but out to sea, I really don't know.
Very quickly, to David Martin, our Pentagon correspondent. Dave, we only have 15 to 20 seconds before Secretary Shultz and Secretary Weinberger are to appear. Is there any very late information we haven't mentioned?
No, I don't think so, Dan, except for the fact that the port facility, which you mentioned as being one of the targets, I believe was struck because U.S. intelligence says it is a training base for Libyan commandos. All of these targets will, in some way, I'm sure, be linked in the coming days to various parts of the terrorist apparatus, such as the airport at Tripoli, where Soviet-made IL-76 transport planes are based. Those planes, U.S. intelligence believes, ferry some of the terrorist equipment and personnel overseas on terrorist missions. I think part of the aim of the attack was to take out those transport planes.
Excuse me, David. I'm sorry to interrupt. We will come back to you a little later on. We'll go down to the White House briefing room where Secretary of State Shultz and Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger will brief. We go live now to the White House.
The President has just described an act of self-defense on the part of the United States. The action was proportionate to the sustained, clear, continuing, and widespread use of terror against Americans and others by Gaddafi's Libya. As the President said, we must remember, and of course Europeans particularly remember, that tolerance or appeasement of aggression has historically brought more aggression. In Gaddafi's case, what we have seen over a period of years and escalating in recent months is a continuing increase in the use of terror. So this is not a question of something that we have done being countered by something he has done and so on. It has been an escalation by Gaddafi that has called forward this act of self-defense on the part of the United States. So under these circumstances, the President decided that it was time to act, and he did. Secretary Weinberger will describe more precisely what the action was.
Tell us about casualties first.
At about 7 p.m. Eastern Time, elements, medium units of the 3rd Air Force attacked targets in the western Libyan zone, and at the same time, A-6s from the America and the Coral Sea attacked targets in the eastern Libya zone as listed here. The targets of the western zone were the military airport near Tripoli, the Azizia barracks, which are a command and control headquarters of the Libyan terrorist activities, and Sidi Bilal, which is a training area, including a maritime diver training unit for terrorists in the west. In the east, the Jamahira barracks, which is an alternate command post from the Azizia barracks, was also attacked, and the Benina Air Base, from which defensive, suppressive activities and air defense would be mounted, was attacked. We used a combination of 500-pound and 2,000-pound laser-guided weapons and precision-guided delayed gravity bombs. And all of the Navy planes have returned without casualty. All of the F-111s, with one exception, have been accounted for and are returning. There is one that is not accounted for at this time. They will reach recover to their home bases somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2 a.m. Eastern Time. The bomb damage assessment at the moment is limited. and we've not had full reports, but we do know that at Benina Air Base, the base was closed. They were unable to launch any aircraft. They had no lights, no radar, no communication as a result of the attack. We will have very full reports of the attack as the F-111s return to their bases in the early morning, and we will have more precise bomb damage assessments at that time. The attack was carried out precisely as planned, and it was, as the President said, evidence of very great skill, both navigational as well as the organization of the attack, which was a difficult one from the professional point of view, and done with a great effectiveness. And we should have the fuller reports of the bomb damage assessment at that time. All of the targets were terrorist-related, and the criteria for selecting the targets was that they would be had a full terrorist connection, that we would minimize any collateral damage from civilian or other facilities nearby, that we would have full consideration for the safety of the pilots as a major consideration, and that they would be good night targets in the sense that they had good outlines that could be reflected on the radar and not mistaken for other targets.
Was there an effort, sir, to get Gaddafi personally?
No, there was not.
Reports that some of his family had been injured.
There was. We don't know anything about those reports. They're from the Libyan radio.
Mr. Secretary, do you,
How many
Mr. Secretary,
people do you think you
Tell us.
killed?
We have no idea that we killed
Do
anybody.
you
Mr.
care?
Secretary, do you believe that that F-111 was shot down?
We don't have any indication to the fact at all. It's simply not accounted for at this time.
What other than it having been shot down, what other explanation could there be for not hearing?
Well, there are any one of a number of explanations. It could have radio trouble. It could be going to another base because of the radio trouble. It could have had an internal problem, an internal explosion. But there's no indication that there was it went down or was a victim of any enemy fire or anything at the time.
There is also a report, sir, that you hit part of the French embassy in Libya. Do you know anything about that?
No, that would be, I think, virtually impossible. Yes.
Did Mrs. Thatcher approve the F-111s taking off from British soil?
I'm sorry?
Did Mrs. Thatcher approve the F-111s taking off from British soil?
Yes, permission was
Can
granted.
you tell us, sir, when the decision was made to proceed with this operation?
Over a considerable period of time as the evidence mounted and as the discussions were held.
Mr. Secretary,
the number of aircraft involved.
I'm sorry?
Could you give us the number of aircraft
Yes,
involved?
there were about 18 F-111s initially that were planned for, and there were about 15 A6s and 7s, and a supporting aircraft in addition to that in the form of tankers, the E-2Cs, the fighter cover, and various other missions that were flown at the same time. A very considerable number. I don't have the exact total. Could you put up the other chart? This is the route that was followed by the F-111s from the bases in England at Mendenhall and Lakenheath and Upper Hayford, and the tankers followed along down there, and they went through that as a total of about 2,800 nautical miles.
Was the Soviet Union told in advance?
Can you
Was the
say
Soviet...
if there was any permanent damage intended or likely to be inflicted by this, or is this really just a temporary?
Not at this, not on this scale. There was certainly no slight suggestion that it was any gesture of any kind. It was intended to do exactly as Secretary Schultz and the President said.
Was the Soviet Union informed?
They were informed, but George, you want to have a little time?
Respect.
The Soviet Union was told that we had conclusive evidence of Libyan involvement in terrorist activity, including the Berlin bombing. At the time of the military operation, that is, as it was taking place, the Soviet charge here, the senior Soviet in Washington, was called in and told of the operation. He was told why, he was told of our evidence, and he was told that this action was directed against Libyan terrorism and was in no way directed against the Soviet Union.
Mr. Secretary, to what extent do you think this settles the score with Libya, sir? To what extent do you think this settles the score with
It's not a question of settling scores. It's a question of acting against terrorism, of saying to terrorists that The acts they perpetrate will cost them. If you raise the costs, you do something that should eventually act as a deterrent. And that is the primary objective, to defend ourselves both in the immediate sense and prospectively.
Secretary, what steps have been taken now in the wake of this attack in order to increase the security around United States embassies abroad, especially in the Middle East?
All of our embassies are on alert, of course. We have reports and indications, quite substantial evidence, of Libyan efforts to attack, varying degrees of certainty on the evidence, up to 30 of our embassies. So when I say that Gaddafi's planning is widespread, the evidence is quite clear that it is.
Recent planning?
Yes, absolutely.
Mr. Secretary, I would also add that the military installations around the world are also on full alert for attacks, terrorist attacks of any kind from any quarter.
Mr. Secretary, if we have such good evidence and if we have such good intelligence about this, particularly what the spokesman and the president have said tonight, why were we unable to stop that Berlin attack if we knew one had been ordered the day before?
We knew that they had ordered an attack in Berlin. Berlin's a big place. And we were in the process of trying to track down, and I think in Berlin and in other places, through the intelligence we collected, through the cooperation with other countries and their intelligence, we have been able to abort and stop a number of terrorist acts. And in this case, we were not able to identify the particular disco and get people cleaned out in time.
We were within 15 minutes, according to General Rogers, of getting notifications with respect to this particular installation as to the fact that it was potentially a dangerous area.
Secretary Jones,
the Secretary's asking for a little order, and I concur that he
Okay,
should.
right here.
Mr. Secretary, if you raise your hands, he will call on you.
Okay, I've called on him.
In light of the Syrian government's pledge to back the Libyan government in this crisis, are we now also on the alert for any Syrian-sponsored acts of terrorism directed against the United States?
We are on the alert for any acts of terrorism against the United States, and of course, we have a collaborative pattern with other countries, and we're as concerned about terrorism against others as we are about ourselves.
To follow it up, you indicated that we now have evidence that the Libyans were planning terrorist attacks against up to 30 U.S. embassy or diplomatic facilities.
That's right.
Do we have any evidence of Syrian planning to attack or launch terrorist attacks on Americans?
I have nothing that I'm prepared to talk about on that score at all. On the other hand, Syria has made the statement that you quoted. To what that will turn out to mean remains to be seen.
Mr. Secretary, why do we stand alone among the Allies, with the exception of Margaret Thatcher, apparently? Why did the European community caution us against retaliating, if our evidence is so good?
With respect to our allies, we have a variety of opinions, and I would have to say, having talked with a great many of them recently, opinions vary within those governments. And I think, in general, what we see is a shift in the direction of seeing very clearly what Gaddafi is, what he is doing, and gradually, more and more coming to the conclusion that something needs to be done about it. Today, the European community foreign ministers met. They were not apprised of what we were going to do, although some of those governments were aware of our plans, obviously the British. And they stepped up, in effect, their attitude of condemnation of Libya. They singled Libya out by name. So there is movement, but as you say, they do not yet share our conviction that action of this kind is necessary.
Was there a Soviet response from the Chargé here or from any other quarter?
They will, other countries will have to speak for themselves, including the Soviet Union.
Mr. Secretary, Secretary Weinberger,
yes.
Looking at the route followed by the aircraft,
yes.
Is that route evasive action, or is that to avoid flying over the soil of allies that might...
Well, obviously, if we had permission to fly a direct route, we would have not subjected the pilots to quite such a long flight. But given the available routes that we had, we left England and we reached Libya. It would have been, obviously, from an operational point of view, less risk to the pilots and a quicker time than it took to go the 2,800 nautical miles to get in there. There were, when a route of that kind is chosen, you also try to do as much as you can by changes of altitude and so on to have the maximum evasiveness.
Sorry, just follow up.
Yeah.
2,800 miles is an awfully long flight.
It is a very long flight. It is.
If you had permission for overflights on that other on other countries' soil, how short?
Oh, we would have probably saved maybe close to 1,200 nautical miles. Down and 1,200 back.
What is the range of an F-111?
Well, it's refueled. Its range is virtually unlimited as long as you can refuel it, and they were refueled many times.
Was permission sought?
I'm sorry?
Was permission sought, for example, from France and denied?
Well, I think that's a fair description.
Secretary, may I ask a question about what if this does not...
I'm sorry, you had a follow-up. Yeah.
Other countries as well?
No, that would have been the direct route.
Can you explain, the president cited, for example, that the French assisted in uncovering...
That was an earlier case. They did indeed. Yeah.
Secretary, what if this does not deter Gaddafi and terrorism continues? What then?
That gets us into the hypotheticals, and as you know, I try not to deal with those. The president, I think, made it very clear that he didn't feel that this would necessarily automatically spell the end of terrorism. But I think it will send an unmistakable signal, and I think it will go very far towards deterring future acts. As the president said, we're prepared to take other action if it does not.
Well, I'd like to follow that up, sir, by asking Secretary Schultz. You are the one who said that this was not a ratcheting up, or words to that effect, but a response to self-defense. But what if Gaddafi strikes back? Do we not then have to ratchet up our military response?
We will take the action that is wise as we see the situation unfold. What is clear tonight is that the United States will take military action under certain circumstances. That's established. That's very important. Now, the situation will unfold and we'll see where we go from there.
Secretary Schultz, how much operational damage, though, does this do to Gaddafi and the terrorist operation? I mean, how long does this put him out of business? I guess what I'm asking is it an operational damage or a psychological blow that you're hoping to strike?
Of course, we don't have any real damage assessment as yet, and we will get that, and so we'll know more precisely what happened. But we seek to reduce his capability of carrying on terrorist acts, and I'm sure to some degree that was done. And we also have registered the point with him and with other Libyans that they will pay a price, that there is a cost to engaging in terrorism around the world. So they know that.
Mr. Secretary, did Mrs. Thatcher give one more question?
Go ahead.
Did Mrs. Thatcher give unqualified support, or did she set limits on what she was prepared to allow these planes?
Mrs. Thatcher had obviously many questions and concerns, and they were expressed, and the response was made to them, and permission was given to do what was done.
There are additional reports that the French embassy has been hit in Tripoli.
That I don't think could be accurate reports because of the nature of the targets and the nature of the ordnance used.
The planes counter offensive defensive fire. Our planes under fire.
What about the oil installations? Why did you cut off their money?
What about Stockman?
How soon do you think you'll have a full report on casualties?
Larry, hold the chart.
There'll be full reports in the morning.
Larry, have them bring the
Live from the White House briefing room, Secretary of State George Shultz and Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger following up with briefings of their own, a joint briefing by the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense. This after President Reagan spoke to the nation for on the order of 6 or 7 minutes earlier in the evening. Now, quickly summing up just now, what we believe we know at this hour are at least the major points. There is one U.S. aircraft known to be missing, according to the Secretary of Defense. He didn't say it was hit during the attack. It's simply missing. Secretary Weinberger indicated, in fact emphasized, that it could turn up later. That is a U.S. F-111. That's a long-range radar and missile avoiding fighter bomber that has normally has a crew of 2, a pilot and an electronics and weapons expert aboard. That the one F-111, they had to fly a long way from Great Britain to Libya. The French wouldn't allow them to fly over French territory, so they had to go around France, be refueled in the air. One of those F-111s is missing. Now, all of the aircraft based on aircraft carriers, that would have been primarily in terms of the strike aircraft, some 15 A-6s and 7s, all of those are believed to have returned to the aircraft carriers. This was jointly conducted airstrikes on Libyan targets tonight. F-111s flying from bases in Britain. These are U.S. planes, but flying from bases in Britain, and the carrier-based planes taking part in the joint strike. One F-111 jet so far not accounted for. Fate of the craft and crew of 2 unknown. The U.S. jets hit their targets with laser-guided bombs. These were the targets as described by U.S. officials. Libyan barracks in Tripoli and Benghazi, a port facility at Sidi Bilal, believed to be a staging area for Libyan terrorist attacks overseas. In fact, one source describes Sidi Bilal as a naval compound some 20 miles west of Tripoli where terrorists of every nationality, including Syrians and Palestinians, have been trained over the years. Also among the targets, an oil pumping facility as well. The military side of the Tripoli airport, where Soviet transport planes are often located. Were there any Soviet transport planes on the ground tonight during the strike? No word on that. We simply do not know. The Benina military airfield, where Soviet MiG-25s are sometimes kept. When we say Soviet MiG-25s, of course, Soviet-manufactured MiGs. Again, whether any of them were actually on the ground tonight during this strike, unknown. This Benina Air Base and airport is half military and half civilian. The United States says all of the targets were in one way or another involved in Libyan terrorism. President Reagan said the United States had what he called irrefutable proof of Muammar Gaddafi's involvement in terror attacks already carried out and still being planned. U.S. officials tonight made no mention of reports from the French Foreign Ministry that the French embassy in Libya had been bombed. You heard, if you've been with us all the way through, Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger denied that the French embassy had been hit. He just simply said he didn't see how that it could have been. In essence, that's what he said. The French Foreign Ministry in Paris is quoted by the AP as saying that the French embassy in Tripoli had indeed been damaged. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that one side of this report is right and the other wrong, because sometimes what happens with pilots in combat is if they get in trouble or think they're in trouble, they sometimes drop their ordnance in an effort to get away from ground fire. Nobody is saying that's what happened here. We simply don't know. What we do know is the French say their embassy was damaged. Nobody injured so far as we can determine, said the French, but that their embassy was damaged. Secretary Weinberger said, in effect, that he seriously doubts that. Now, the United States also had no comment tonight on the Libyan radio claim that Gaddafi's residence in Tripoli had been hit and that some of Gaddafi's relatives had been wounded. That report came from Libyan radio, which in the past has been a pillar of inaccuracy. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's accurate or inaccurate. That's simply what Libyan radio has reported. No confirmation of that. Also monitored in London, Libyan radio reported that 3 U.S. planes had been downed. You may recall that previously in an engagement around the Gulf of Sidra, the Libyans claimed, or Libyan radio claimed, that some U.S. planes had been downed when in fact they had not. The only plane known to be missing, not yet confirmed down, but missing, is that one F-111. David Martin reports on tonight's raids from the Pentagon.
It was the largest American air raid since the Vietnam War. It began this morning Eastern Time when 2 aircraft carriers steamed through the Straits of Messina between Italy and Sicily. At 4 p.m. Eastern Time, long-range F-111 bombers took off from their base in Great Britain, arriving over their targets at 7 p.m., the same time as attack planes launched from the carriers. According to one source, the attack plan called for the Air Force to go after targets in the Tripoli area and for the Navy to attack sites on the Benghazi side of the Gulf of Sidra. Here is what they attempted to hit. Barracks in both Tripoli and Benghazi, which U.S. intelligence believes housed the command bunkers and training areas for Libyan terrorist squads. A port facility said to be used as a training base for Libyan commandos. The military side of the Tripoli airport, where Soviet transport planes are based, planes which are believed to ferry terrorist supplies and personnel overseas. A military airfield where Soviet-made MiG-25s are based, planes which, had they gotten aloft, might have been able to shoot down the American aircraft. One source said the timing of the raid was linked to the movement of Soviet ships today out of their anchorage near the Libyan border with Egypt. Once those ships got underway, the attack could not be delayed for fear they would get into a position from which they could provide an early warning to the Libyans.
The damage done by a raid of that size was almost certainly extensive. The real question tonight is whether it will be enough to stop Gaddafi. Dan?
David, any further word on what the Soviets were told? Secretary of State Schultz was pretty explicit. He said the Soviet Chargé had been called in and told that this raid was not in any way directed to the Soviets. Any further information about that?
None whatsoever, but it's clear from both what Secretary Schultz said and also what I hear in the building that there was no advanced warning that the Soviets could have used in any way to tip off the Libyans. They were told after the fact or at a point when tactical warning was no longer a factor in the raid.
David, Secretary of Defense Weinberger wouldn't say much about the missing F-111. He did say that it wasn't necessarily hit by fire over Libya. He simply said he didn't know what happened to it. Any other information on that?
No. As a matter of fact, I've been standing here in front of this camera since he said that and I haven't had a chance to check on it. So I have no additional information on that.
Has there been any complaining around the Pentagon that France said no to the overflights of the F-111s and made them go around?
Well, there certainly will be. It hasn't occurred yet, simply because we haven't had time to get out and report on it. This raid was extremely tightly held, and as a matter of fact, as we went into the late afternoon today, the real tip-off that something was about to happen was the extreme tight hold on information. You just could not find the normal people to talk to, and you just sensed that something was up rather than have anybody be able to tell you, just because of the tight hold on the information.
Thank you very much, David Martin. We want to join now, asked to join in our conversation, Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations here in New York. Good evening, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for being with us. Will this stop terrorism?
I think it'll help. I don't think you stop terrorism with a one-shot solution. It's going to involve a succession of blows and counter-blows and maybe some casualties along the way, but over the long run, these bully regimes like Gaddafi have to understand that the victims of his assaults and his killers will simply not sit back and take it, and I think that this is an important step in that direction.
And what about the theory that, as much as we'd like it to be an important step in that direction, that in fact what we're doing is hitting at a shadow with a club, and that it really can't do anything to stop terrorism and may increase it?
I don't think so. I think that the great proportion of terrorism that we see today, international terrorism, is based on activities launched by regimes, by states like Gaddafi. Gaddafi, Syria, Iran, and a handful of others. Now, to the extent that these regimes understand that you will take action, they will begin to rethink their activity. And I may add also that these regimes in the Middle East worship power. If they think they can get away with it, if they appear strong, if they are confronted by a repeated refusal to punish them, they get stronger, more encouraged to conduct further terrorism. That's why I think that there may have been a turning of a corner here today, and it's certainly an important event.
You're aware that others think it's a turning of a corner, but in the other direction, that this may lead to increased pressure, perhaps destabilization on Egypt, Chad, the Sudan, Morocco. Do you agree?
No, I do not. I think that there's a lot of rhetoric in the Middle East. You might even hear condemnation by some of these countries for the American action, but in their heart of hearts, many of these regimes secretly would welcome activities to weaken Gaddafi. After all, many of them have been the targets of Gaddafi's secret terrorist war. I think that over the long run, there's a race between the radical, fanatical terrorist regimes in the Middle East and the less radical ones. To the extent that the radicals and the terrorists are weakened, the position of everyone is improved.
Do you think this has helped Gaddafi's standing among other Arabs?
No, I don't think so. I think that there's a lot of bluster, a lot of rhetoric, a lot of bravado. When Gaddafi is exposed, as he was today, I think for the first time, to be militarily vulnerable, to have a preponderant opponent who can strike him at will, I think it begins to propagate a crack the mask of invincibility and bragging is now exposed to everyone. And I think once the cracks are introduced, they'll propagate very fast.
Mr. Ambassador, when Israel went into Lebanon, whether one chooses to call it an invasion or an incursion, the stated purpose of General Sharon and others was to smash terrorism. Now, here in 1986, we're not only dealing with it, we're dealing with it in a heightened sense, and more the targets are American targets.
Well, indeed, I think that the Americans actually over the last 10 years have been the great majority of terrorist victims, over 40%. The West is the target of terrorism. You are not going to solve it with one-shot solutions, but since you mentioned the Israeli experience, you know, we've not had a single Israeli plane hijacked since Entebbe. Not a single attack on an Israeli-bound plane or Israeli base plane anywhere in the world. And that's not because Gaddafi or anyone else of these terrorists like us. It's because they think there'll be a response, and they are careful. Deterrence works on terrorists just like it does on anyone else.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
We want to go quickly now to London, where Patrick Seal, the London Observer Middle East correspondent, a man with long experience and many contacts in the Middle East, is standing by in London. Mr. Seal, thank you for being with us again tonight. I gather you don't think this raid will do much good towards stopping terrorism.
I think it's tragic to see the United States pursuing a policy which I feel is disastrously wrong. Now, I think one can make a few very confident predictions. First of all, this is not going to make the world safer and more secure. It's going to pour fuel on the flame. Secondly, I think one can say that Colonel Gaddafi will emerge from this a hero in the eyes of many Arabs. And thirdly, I think undoubtedly this is a shot in the arm for the Soviets, because many Arabs will now think that they need the Soviets more than ever as a counterweight to the United States.
I know you couldn't hear him, but we just had on the air Ambassador Netanyahu, the Israeli ambassador here in New York, and he made the point that since the Israelis struck at Entebbe, they haven't had a single airliner hijacked. He's making the point that this kind of decisive action can be effective against terrorism.
You see, the Israelis may not have had an aircraft hijacked, but they've been hit very hard in the Lebanon. And indeed, the great mistake of American policy, in my view, is to see Gaddafi as an isolated phenomenon. Gaddafi and what he does and the groups which he helps, all these things are intimately tied up with the Arab-Israeli conflict in Lebanon and in the occupied territories. Gaddafi's friends are groups who are fighting Israel in Lebanon because of Israel's continued occupation of Lebanon, and who are fighting Israel in the occupied territories. Now, for the United States not to understand that connection or wish not to see it is a fatal error of policy which will expose the United States and its targets more and more to attack.
One final question, Mr. Steele. In the crescent of the Middle East that includes Libya, crescent both from a religious standpoint and a geographic standpoint, what happens now with Chad, Sudan, Egypt, Morocco? Are they affected in any way by this?
Well, of course they are. Countries allied to the United States, close to the United States, like Egypt, will be very embarrassed. The thing to understand is that the United States is now at war with an Arab country, a country which has many friends in the region: Palestinians, Lebanese, Syrians, Iranians, and many others. This is not going to stop terrorism, it's going to increase it, and Americans, I regret to say, are going to be the targets, and unfortunately the British as well, because Mrs. Thatcher has stuck her neck out in a way which will arouse passions in Britain similar to those aroused by the 1956 Suez campaign.
Thank you very much, Robert Steele of the London Observer in London. Now, in Washington, Senator Sam Nunn of Georgia and the House Minority Leader Bob Michael are in our Washington studio. Gentlemen, good evening. Thank you for being with us. First, Senator Nunn, do you support this unequivocally?
Well, I would not want to use the word that strong, but I think we were justified in taking the action we took. The evidence was overwhelming about Libya's involvement in terrorism. I think the question of the targets and how extensive they were, all of that has to await analysis, but I think the President was justified in taking this step.
I don't quite understand what you mean by saying the choice of targets and how extensive they were. Are you suggesting that there may be some criticism that too many targets were hit?
Well, there may be some of those, but my own concern is that once you take an action this bold involving this kind of military force, I want it to be effective. I want it to do some damage. I want it to do enough damage to be a real deterrent in the future.
By that, I don't mean civilian damage, I do mean military damage. I would have to wait and look at the results of that.
So your question is, was it strong enough? Was it hard enough?
Was it enough? Was it enough? Because once you do this, you're going to pay a downside price. There was a very large risk. We're going to pay that. We're not going to end all acts of terrorism. But I do think we should, and I hope we have, send a message that we will not tolerate terrorism and that retaliation will be swift and sure, and it will also be strong enough to really deter and to penalize.
Democratic Senator Sam Nunn of Georgia. Now, from the Republican side, House Minority Leader Bob Michael, you support this unequivocally.
Well, yes, I do. Well, I think there have been so many instances, frankly, of terrorism that have been thwarted by the fact that we've had some advanced knowledge of it, and in concert with some of our allies have been able to deter those acts. So this was not the first instance by any stretch of the imagination, but one that really has triggered it, and I guess as Senator Nunn has said, particularly with the irrefutable kind of evidence that we have that they were responsible, that we had no alternative to but make our case on this one.
What are you hearing from your constituents at home? Are you hearing much concern about we're beating our breast, we're sending in aircraft carriers, and the next thing you know we're going to be in a war?
Well, I haven't, of course, naturally it's too early to get a response from our constituency on today's actions, and prior to that our mail has not disclosed any undue concern by our constituents, other than the expressed belief from time to time when we look at the Achille Lauro and several of the others, that when is our government going to take the kind of action necessary to remedy this, to make it absolutely safe and sure for Americans to travel abroad. That was the general concern and frustration that I sensed among my constituents.
Senator Nunn, is it your view that this may indeed make travel safer for Americans and it may reduce terrorism?
Not in the short run. I think the best we can hope for is that we will begin to deter state-supported terrorism. I think it's a mistake to view Gaddafi as the only source of terrorism. He is the loudest, he is the most obnoxious, but there are many other elements of terrorism, both independent and state-sponsored. So we may have some rough sailing in the short run. Over the long haul, I hope this action will begin to deter what I call state-supported terrorism.
And Representative Michael, your view, will it reduce terrorism beginning now?
Well, I would certainly have to agree with what Senator Nunn has said. Gaddafi, for the moment, is the high visible character and culprit here, but there are some other known places where terrorists abide, and not necessarily state-supported as formally as with Gaddafi. But I think it's going to be a long haul. We're really, as the Secretary of State has pointed out and the President a number of times, we're in a new kind of war here of state-supported terrorism, and we're breaking some new ground here, obviously, and it'll take us some time to shake this all out. I have to express some concern. You know, what's the next step? Perhaps if it comes from another country, what do we do there? Is the retaliation, is the action just the same? I think not. I think we're going to have to take each one of these on their individual basis and merit or demerit, as the case may be, and treat them as we see them at the time.
Thank you very much, Representative Bob Michael and Senator Nunn. Fuad Ajami, who is the Director of Middle East Studies at Johns Hopkins University, is here in our New York studio with us. Mr. Ajami has served from time to time as a CBS News consultant for us. Good evening, Professor Ajami. Thank you for joining us here. What is going to be the likely reaction in the Arab world?
Well, look, the Arab world will have two responses. The public response will be, in effect, to denounce the U.S., to say that the U.S., the great Satan, has come and attack a sovereign Arab state. But I think my own feeling that the real response in the Arab world will be much more judicious. The Arabs understand that America has been pushed, and the Arabs understand that Reagan really had no option. Once we have a smoking gun against Gaddafi, once we had the evidence against Gaddafi, something had to be done. And I think the real moderate mainstream in the Arab world will understand this.
What is the biggest danger of what the United States did tonight?
Well, I don't really see the danger. I mean, my own view is that the U.S. really had no option. Gaddafi had been on a rampage, and we had this trail of terror. America has been targeted, particularly since the summer of 1982. And so the notion of a great power sitting idly by and having its citizens being targeted is not a very persuasive one. And I think, again, in the large mainstream of the Arab world, this would be completely understood.
And if you had to guess, which is all anyone can do, does Egypt feel an immediate repercussion and immediate new danger from this?
Well, the Egyptians are the most vulnerable. I mean, I think you've asked the right question, Dan. This is a regime that is threatened by an Islamic movement from below. It's a regime that's close, geographically close to Libya. And I think that so long as the Egyptians were not identified with this attack, for example, if this attack had been launched from Egyptian territory, I think the Egyptian regime would be held to account by the Islamic movement and would be vulnerable to Gaddafi's charges. But since we've done this out of England, since Egypt could in a way dissociate itself from this act, I think the Egyptians are safe for now.
Thank you, Fuad Ajami. Now, Alan Pizzi, our veteran correspondent, is standing by in Tripoli once again by telephone. Alan, what is the city of Tripoli like coming up on dawn after these U.S. airstrikes?
Dan, the city is very quiet. It's mostly blacked out. The lights have been turned off over most of the city. The hotel where the journalists are housed is without lights or water at the moment, but it's eerily quiet. There's not much traffic moving. There's almost no sound at all. It's just like a normal dawn coming up here.
And have you been able to see any damage or get even eyewitness accounts of the damage?
No, we haven't. Phone calls have not been coming into this hotel, and no one's been allowed to come out or move around, although we have had reports from Libyan radio that Gaddafi's compound was hit, where his family lives with he lives with his wife and 7 children, several top advisors. The radio said that several members of Gaddafi's family were wounded and that there were a lot of other people wounded, among them a lot of foreigners. But we don't know who those foreigners might be, probably Soviet bloc people if they were inside Gaddafi's compound. It covers several acres, and there are the houses of his top advisors are in there, and it's walled, it's surrounded by tanks and so on. You can't get in.
Alan, there are about 1,000 Americans, it's my understanding, in Libya. Are they in any danger, or are you in any danger in the wake of these attacks?
It's impossible to say, Dan, but I don't think so. The Libyan security is very heavy in this hotel, and they came around and very politely asked us to put our flashlights out and just use candles. But apart from that, there hasn't been anything at all. And while there is a lot of overt anti-Americanism here in the form of posters and rhetoric, Americans and other foreigners move quite freely around this city with the normal restrictions that are imposed in a country like this, and there's no real fear of harassment on the street at all. So I don't know if they will bother Americans here or not, but I would seriously doubt that.
Alan, you described earlier for us in detail, and we heard the gunfire and the blasts in and around Tripoli while the raid was underway. Was there anything to indicate anywhere, was there anything to indicate dogfights among aircraft?
No, nothing at all, absolutely not. There was the sound of the jets coming in on their bombing runs, very low, very fast, very loud, but there was no other sign of aerial activity and no sound or any kind of visual image to indicate that there was any kind of dogfighting or aerial interception. I think those planes had to face only anti-aircraft fire and possibly some missiles, although I don't know about that, but certainly anti-aircraft fire. They did drop behind them large glowing balls which are used to distract surface-to-air missiles, but no one saw any missiles going up.
Thank you very much, Alan Pizzi in Tripoli. Now, recapping, as we leave you, at least for the moment, there'll be further details at the very latest on your late local news. The latest word we have is that one of the U.S. planes involved in tonight's airstrikes over Libya, an F-111 long-range bomber that took off from Britain, one F-111, 2 persons believed aboard, remains unaccounted for. No word on the fate of the plane or the crew. U.S. officials stress this does not necessarily mean it was shot down. They simply don't know where it is. They say they do know that all other U.S. craft, the other F-111 long-range jets designed to hug the terrain and avoid enemy radar, all of them did get out of Libyan airspace and are accounted for. So are, it is said by U.S. officials, all accounted for, the U.S. planes that took part in the raids that came from the aircraft carriers. Now, there is no confirmation that any of Gaddafi's family quarters were hit. No confirmation yet that the French embassy in Tripoli was damaged, although the French say that it was. We'll have more details for you later. For now, Dan Rather in New York. Good night.
This is CBS.